A massive, wounded wolf collapses at Omega Ember's doorstep during the worst blizzard in decades. She risks everything to save a creature that shouldn't be able to speak but does, begging for shelter in a voice that carries the unmistakable authority of an alpha. As she nurses him back to health in the firelight, neither realizes that her act of mercy has just set in motion events that will either destroy them both or reshape the entire pack hierarchy forever. But when the search parties arrive and Ember discovers the silver pendant hidden in his fur, bearing the symbol of the most powerful pack in the territories, she has to wonder, what kind of alpha ends up dying alone in the snow? And what will happen when his pack discovers where he's been hiding? The scream that tore through the winter night made Ember drop her mug of hot tea. She pressed her face against the frosted window, heart hammering as another terrible sound echoed from the dark forest. Not quite human, not quite animal. Something caught between the two. 3 days of blizzard had turned her little cottage into an island surrounded by white waves. The wind howled like angry spirits, rattling her windows and doors. But this new sound was different. This sound had pain in it. Ember grabbed her heaviest coat from the hook by the door. Her hands shook as she pulled on thick boots. Every smart part of her brain screamed to stay inside, lock the doors, pretend she heard nothing. She was just one Omega living alone. No pack to protect her, no alpha to call for help. But the sound came again, weaker this time. Desperate, she opened her door and gasped. The cold hit her like a slap. Snow swirled everywhere, making it hard to see past her porch. The beam of her flashlight barely cut through the storm. She took one careful step outside, then another. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice got swallowed by the wind. "Is someone there?" Dark spots in the snow caught her attention. She knelt down and touched one with her gloved finger. Even through the leather, she could feel it was still warm. Blood, a trail of it led from the trees toward her house. Ember followed the red dots, her flashlight dancing across the white ground. Each drop was bigger than the last. Whatever was bleeding was getting worse. The trail curved around the side of her cottage, past her woodpile, past her garden buried under snow. Then she saw it. A massive shape lay crumpled against her back porch steps. At first, she thought it might be a fallen tree branch, but branches didn't breathe. Branches didn't whimper. The wolf was huge, bigger than any wolf she'd ever seen in nature books. His fur was silver black, now matted with ice and blood. One back leg bent at a wrong angle. Cuts covered his side like someone had dragged him through thorns for miles. But it was his eyes that made her gasp. Golden yellow. They looked right at her with an intelligence that made her skin tingle. This wasn't just any wolf. This was a shifter. Had to be. No regular animal looked at humans like that. "Oh no," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "What happened to you?" The wolf's mouth opened. A soft whine escaped, followed by something impossible. Words. Actual words, though spoken in a voice rough as gravel. "Please." The sound came from deep in his throat. "Help me." Ember's world tilted. In all her 23 years, she'd never heard a shifter speak while in animal form. Sure, they could mind link with their mates or pack members, but actual speech? That took power most shifters didn't have. "You can talk," she said stupidly. His golden eyes closed, then opened again with great effort. Barely. Can't shift back. Too weak. Too cold. She could see he was telling the truth. Ice crystals had formed in his fur. His breathing came in short puffs that turned to white clouds in the freezing air. If she left him here, he would die before morning. "I don't know how to move you," she said. "You're enormous. Please try." His voice was getting weaker. "Don't want to die alone." Something in those words broke her heart. She looked at this powerful creature, brought low by cold and injury, and made a decision that would change everything. "Okay, but you have to help me. Can you move at all?" The wolf managed to lift his head a few inches. "Maybe, if you support me." Ember ran back inside and grabbed every blanket she owned. She spread them on the floor by her fireplace. then returned to the porch. Getting him inside took 20 minutes of pushing, pulling, and encouraging. The wolf dragged himself forward inch by painful inch, while she guided and supported his massive frame. By the time they got him settled by the fire, both were exhausted. Ember collapsed in her chair, breathing hard. The wolf lay on his side, eyes closed, but she could see his chest rising and falling more steadily now that he was warm. She studied him in the firelight. His injuries looked bad, but not deadly. The bent leg worried her most. She'd helped injured animals before, but never anything this big. Never anything that could talk back. "What's your name?" she asked softly. His eyes opened. "Kieran." He paused. "Thank you for saving me." "I haven't saved you yet." She stood up and moved toward her kitchen. "Let me get some supplies. We need to clean those cuts." As she gathered medical supplies, her mind raced. Who was this shifter? What was he doing alone in a blizzard? And why couldn't he change back to human form? Most importantly, what would happen when he got better and left? Because powerful shifters like this one didn't usually associate with packless omegas like her. They had important places to be and important people to see. But for now, he was here, injured and vulnerable, and trusting her to help him. She returned to his side with warm water, clean cloths, and antiseptic. "This might sting," she warned, beginning to clean the worst cut on his side. Kieran tensed, but didn't pull away. "I've had worse." "What happened to you?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, got lost in the storm, fell into a ravine, been wandering for 2 days trying to find shelter. It was a simple explanation, but something in his tone made her think there was more to the story. She didn't push. Everyone had secrets, even her, especially her. "Well, you're safe now," she said, applying bandages to his injuries. The storm should pass by morning. But even as she said it, wind rattled her windows harder than before. This storm wasn't ending anytime soon. And that meant she and this mysterious shifter named Kieran would be stuck together for at least another day, maybe longer. The fire crackled as she finished tending his wounds. Kieran's breathing had evened out, and some of the tension had left his massive frame. But Ember found herself unable to settle. Something about this whole situation felt significant in a way she couldn't quite name. She'd lived alone for 3 years now, ever since leaving the pack that had taken her in as an orphan child. That pack had been traditional in all the worst ways omegas were seen but not heard, valued only for their potential to bear strong pups. When she'd refused an arranged mating to a brutal alpha twice her age, they'd given her a choice: submit or leave. She'd chosen freedom over safety, solitude over subjugation. Most days, she didn't regret that choice. But on nights like this, with the wind howling and the darkness pressing in, she sometimes wondered what it would be like to have someone to share the burden of existence. Now, watching this mysterious wolf sleep by her fire, she felt something stirring that she'd thought she'd buried forever. Not just attraction, though the power radiating from him, even in his injured state, was undeniably compelling, but something deeper. A sense of rightness, as if the universe had finally decided to balance the scales of her lonely life. "Don't be ridiculous," she whispered to herself, settling back in her chair with the blanket. "He'll be gone as soon as he's strong enough to walk." But as she drifted toward sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, Ember couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Morning brought no relief from the storm, but it did bring something unexpected. Ember woke to the sound of quiet humming coming from her living room. She crept to her doorway and peeked around the corner. Kieran was still in wolf form, but he was sitting up now, looking much stronger. His golden eyes were fixed on her bookshelf, and the humming seemed to be his way of reading the titles out loud. When he noticed her watching, he stopped. "Sorry, did I wake you?" "No, it's fine." She padded into the kitchen and started making coffee. "How do you feel?" "Better, much better, thanks to you." He shifted position carefully, favoring his injured leg. "That medicine you used worked fast." Ember poured 2 cups of coffee, then realized the problem. How exactly do you drink coffee in that form? For the first time since she'd found him, Kieran made a sound that might have been laughter, very carefully. Or you could just let me smell it. Sometimes that's enough. She sat cross-legged on the floor near him, holding her mug close to his nose. He breathed in deeply and sighed with satisfaction. I haven't had real coffee in weeks, he said. Most places I've been staying don't exactly offer room service. You've been traveling a lot? His ears flattened slightly. You could say that. Another non-answer. Ember was starting to notice a pattern. Every time she asked about his past or what he was doing out here, Kieran found ways to change the subject. What about you? He asked. Do you always live alone out here? For the past 3 years. It's peaceful. She took a sip of coffee. Most of the time. No pack? The question hit like a cold wind. Ember set down her mug and stared into the fire. I don't really fit with packs. They have rules, expectations. I'm better on my own. That must get lonely. Sometimes. She glanced at him. What about your pack? Are they looking for you? Kieran's whole body went rigid. His ears perked up like he was listening for something. Why do you ask? Because you've been gone for days in a blizzard. Someone must be worried. Before he could answer, a sound echoed through the forest, distant but unmistakable, howling, multiple voices calling out in harmony. Kieran scrambled to his feet, ignoring his injured leg. He limped to the window and pressed his nose against the glass. The howling came again, closer this time. They found me, he whispered, and there was fear in his voice. Isn't that good? Your pack can help you get home safely. You don't understand. Kieran turned from the window, his golden eyes wide with panic. They can't know I was here. They can't know you helped me. Why not? Because you're an unmated Omega and I'm... He stopped himself. It's complicated. The howling was definitely getting closer. Ember could make out individual voices now. At least 5 or 6 wolves, all calling for someone. Probably him. What aren't you telling me, Kieran? He looked at her with something like desperation. If they find out I've been here, accepting help from you while I was vulnerable, it could put you in danger. Real danger. What kind of danger? The howling stopped suddenly. In the silence that followed, they could hear something else. Footsteps crunching through snow. Voices talking in low tones, getting closer to her cottage. Kieran made a decision. He limped away from the window and lay down in the corner behind her couch, making himself as small as possible for such a large wolf. Hide me, he whispered. Please, just until they leave. Ember's heart raced. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could hear the terror in his voice. Outside, the footsteps were almost at her door. She grabbed the blankets he'd been sleeping on and threw them in her laundry basket. Then she sprayed air freshener around the room, trying to mask his scent. It wasn't much, but maybe it would help. A sharp knock echoed through the cottage. Hello? A male voice called from outside. Anyone home? We're looking for someone who might be injured. Ember took a deep breath and opened the door. 3 men stood on her porch, all wearing heavy winter coats, but she could tell immediately they were shifters. Something about the way they held themselves, the way their eyes scanned everything with predator focus. The one in front was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the kind of confident posture that screamed authority. His smile was polite but didn't reach his eyes. Ma'am, I'm Marcus. He showed her an official-looking badge. We're from the Moonstrike Pack. We're searching for a missing pack member. Large male, might be injured. Have you seen anything unusual in the past few days? Moonstrike Pack. Even Ember knew that name. They were the most powerful shifter pack in the entire Northern Territory. Rich, influential, and absolutely ruthless about protecting their interests. No, sorry, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I've been stuck inside because of the storm. Haven't seen anyone. Marcus's nostrils flared slightly. He was scenting the air, testing her words. Behind him, the other 2 men were doing the same thing. Mind if we look around? just to be thorough. It wasn't really a request. Ember could tell that refusing would only make them more suspicious. She stepped aside and let them enter. The three men moved through her small cottage like they owned it, opening closets, checking under furniture, even looking behind her refrigerator. Marcus lingered by the fireplace, frowning. "You had a fire going all night?" he asked. "It gets cold. I like to keep warm." He crouched down and examined the area where Kieran had been lying. If there were any traces left of his presence, Ember couldn't see them. But Marcus had better senses than she did. Behind the couch, she could see just the tip of Kieran's black tail. If any of these men looked in that direction— "Thank you for your time," Marcus said finally, standing up. "If you see anything suspicious, please contact us immediately." He handed her a business card with the Moonstrike Pack symbol on it, a crescent moon with a lightning bolt through it. "Of course," Ember said, walking them to the door. As soon as they were gone, she locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Kieran emerged from his hiding spot, looking shaken. "That was too close," he said. "Kieran." Ember held up the business card, staring at the symbol. "What exactly is your relationship with the Moonstrike Pack?" He looked at the card and went very, very still. When he raised his eyes to meet hers, she saw something in them that made her stomach drop. Guilt and fear. And something that looked almost like shame. "That's what I've been trying to tell you," he said quietly. "My relationship with them is complicated." Outside, the storm continued to rage, trapping them together with questions that demanded answers. And Ember had a terrible feeling that when she finally learned the truth about Kieran, everything would change. The question was, would it change for better or worse? "Tell me," she said, settling back on the floor beside him. "All of it. Who are you really?" Kieran was quiet for a long time, his golden eyes fixed on the flames dancing in her fireplace. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm the alpha they're looking for. The Moonstrike Pack. They're my pack. Marcus is my beta. And if he'd found me here with you, both our lives would have been forfeit." The words hit Ember like a physical blow. She stared at him, trying to process what he'd just told her. An alpha. Not just any alpha, but the leader of the most powerful pack in the territory. And he'd been hiding in her cottage, letting her care for him, allowing her to risk everything without telling her who he really was. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Because I knew you'd either throw me out or start treating me differently. And He looked at her with such raw vulnerability that her anger faltered. "I haven't felt this safe, this accepted in years, maybe ever." "Safe? You're an alpha. The alpha. You have an entire pack to protect you." "Do I?" His laugh was bitter. "When was the last time someone touched me without wanting something? When did anyone last care about my well-being instead of just my decisions and orders?" Ember thought about the fear she'd heard in his voice when the search party approached. The way he'd hidden behind her couch like a frightened child instead of facing his own pack members. "What aren't you telling me about your pack?" she asked quietly. "It's not my pack anymore," Kieran said, so softly she almost missed it. "I mean, legally it is, but I haven't felt like I belonged there for a long time. The pressure, the expectations, the constant demands." He closed his eyes. "I came out here to think, to figure out if I wanted to keep living a life that was slowly killing me. And then you got caught in the storm. And then I found you. Or you found me." He opened his eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Ember, these past 2 days, they've been the first time I've felt like myself since I became alpha." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cottage, wrapped in firelight and honesty, Ember felt something shifting in her chest. She'd spent 3 years convincing herself she was better alone, but sitting here with this wounded alpha who trusted her with his secrets, she was beginning to remember what connection felt like, and it terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. The change came without warning on the 3rd day. Ember woke to find Kieran thrashing in his sleep, his massive wolf body convulsing as if fighting an invisible enemy. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands hovering uncertainly over his fur. "Kieran? Kieran, wake up!" His eyes snapped open, but they weren't the warm golden color she'd grown accustomed to. They were wild, unfocused, filled with a pain that went beyond physical injury. Can't hold it," he gasped, his voice strained. "The change, it's coming." "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, his body began to shift. Ember scrambled backward as silver-black fur started to recede like waves pulling back from shore. Bones stretched and reformed with sounds like branches bending in strong wind. Muscles rippled and reshaped themselves beneath skin that appeared inch by inch. The transformation was unlike anything she'd ever imagined. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. Like watching a force of nature reshape itself according to laws she couldn't comprehend. Throughout it all, those golden eyes never left her face, as if she were an anchor keeping him tethered to himself. When it was over, a man knelt where the wolf had been. Not just any man, but someone who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as mountain peaks. His dark hair fell in waves past his shoulders, and scars crisscrossed his chest like a map of battles won and lost. But it was his face that made Ember's knees weak, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, and those same golden eyes that had watched her with such gratitude. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Kieran seemed to realize his nakedness and reached for the blanket she'd kept nearby, wrapping it around his waist with movements that spoke of ingrained modesty. "You're beautiful," Ember breathed before she could stop herself. A smile ghosted across his lips, the first real one she'd seen from him. "You sound surprised." I didn't expect." She gestured helplessly at all of him. "What did you expect? Horns and fangs?" "Maybe." She laughed nervously, suddenly very aware that they were alone together, and he was mostly naked and very, very attractive. The stories Omegas tell about alphas aren't exactly flattering. Kieran's expression darkened. What kind of stories? The usual ones. That alphas take what they want and leave nothing but broken hearts behind. That they see Omegas as objects to be claimed, not people to be cherished. She pulled her knees to her chest, creating a barrier between them. That they're monsters wearing human faces. "And what do you think now?" He made no move to come closer, respecting the space she'd created. "Do I look like a monster to you?" Ember studied his face, searching for signs of the cruelty she'd been taught to fear. Instead, she saw exhaustion lines around his eyes, worry etched into his forehead, and something that looked almost like fear in the way he held himself perfectly still. "No," she said finally. "You look like someone who's been carrying the world on his shoulders for too long." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. "How did you know?" "The way you hold yourself, even now. Like you're ready to fight or protect someone at any moment. Like you've forgotten how to just exist without being responsible for everything and everyone." Kieran was quiet for a long time, his gaze dropping to his hands. "My father died when I was 19. I became alpha of the Moonstrike Pack overnight. 8 years later, I still feel like I'm playing a role I never auditioned for." "Is that why you were out there alone? In the storm?" I needed to think. About the pack, about expectations, about, he looked up at her again, about whether I was becoming the kind of alpha I swore I'd never be. "What kind is that?" "The kind who rules through fear instead of respect. The kind who sees pack members as pieces on a chessboard instead of people with their own dreams and needs." His voice grew quieter. "The kind who would let tradition destroy something beautiful just because it doesn't fit into neat little boxes." Ember felt her pulse quicken. What kind of beautiful thing? Instead of answering, Kieran slowly rose to his feet. Even clothed only in a blanket, he moved with a natural grace that spoke of complete comfort in his own skin. He walked to her small window, looking out at the snow-covered forest. Tell me about your life here, he said, before I showed up bleeding on your doorstep. There's not much to tell. I tend my garden, preserve food for winter, read books when I can trade for them in town. She shrugged. It's quiet. Lonely? The word hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Sometimes, she admitted, but lonely is safer than being with the wrong pack. I've seen what happens to Omegas who settle just because they're tired of being alone. And what happens to them? They disappear. Not physically, but the part that makes them who they are just fades away. They become shadows of themselves, existing only to serve someone else's needs. Kieran turned from the window to face her fully. Is that what you think would happen if you joined a pack? Isn't it? She met his gaze directly. You're an alpha, Kieran. The most powerful kind of alpha, from what I can tell. In your world, what value does someone like me have beyond the obvious? You want to know what I see when I look at you? His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Ember's mouth went dry, but she nodded. I see someone who risked her safety to help a stranger. Someone who chose compassion over caution, kindness over self-preservation. I see intelligence in your questions, strength in your independence, and courage in the way you're sitting there looking at me like you're not afraid of anything I might say or do. He took a step closer, then stopped when she tensed. But most of all, he continued, I see someone who makes me want to be worthy of the trust you showed when you pulled me out of that storm. And that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. Why does it terrify you? Because wanting something that badly makes you vulnerable. And alphas can't afford to be vulnerable. Says who? The simple question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. Everyone. My father, the pack elders, every piece of training I've ever received. Alphas led through strength, never show weakness, always put the pack first. He ran a hand through his hair. Do you know what the worst part is? What? I actually believed it all. Right up until 3 days ago, when I collapsed in your snow and you saved my life without asking for anything in return, without even knowing who I was. And now? Now I'm wondering if maybe the strongest thing an alpha can do is admit when he needs someone else. The silence that followed was charged with possibility. Ember could feel something shifting between them, like ice beginning to crack under the pressure of spring. She wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the distance he'd so carefully maintained. But fear held her back, fear of being hurt, of being used, of losing the independence she'd fought so hard to claim. Kieran, she began, then stopped as the sound of howling echoed through the forest again. This time it was closer, much closer, and there was an urgency to it that made both of them freeze. They're not giving up, Kieran said grimly. Maybe you should go to them, end this before someone gets hurt, and tell them what? That I've been hiding with a rogue Omega for 3 days? That I've been lying to them about where I was? He shook his head. They'd never trust me again. Worse, they'd demand to know why I was running from pack responsibilities in the first place. So what do we do? Kieran looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something resolve in his expression. We tell them the truth. All of it. The truth? That I'm done being the alpha they think I should be. That I want to try being the man I actually am. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. That is, if you'll have me. Ember's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want. And what I want is you. This, a chance to build something real with someone who sees me as more than just a title and a set of responsibilities. The howling came again, even closer now. Soon the search party would be at her door, and whatever chance they had to figure this out together would be lost in the chaos of pack politics and ancient laws. Ember, Kieran said urgently, I know I have no right to ask this of you. I know I'm asking you to risk everything for someone you've known for 3 days. But she silenced him with a kiss. It was meant to be brief, just a way to stop his spiraling thoughts and give herself a moment to think. But the moment their lips touched, Something electric shot through her. Kieran's hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite their strength, and she could taste his desperation and hope and fear all mingled together. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Yes," she whispered. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Outside, the howling stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, they could hear voices getting closer. The search party had found them. Kieran's arms tightened around her, and for the first time since she'd found him bleeding in the snow, Ember wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. They had each other now, and somehow that felt like enough to face anything. The knock that came 20 minutes later was sharp and authoritative, leaving no doubt about the identity of the visitors. Ember and Kieran had used the time to prepare as much as possible. He'd found clothes that mostly fit from her emergency supplies, while she'd hidden any obvious signs of his extended stay. But there was no hiding the scent of an alpha who'd spent days in her home, and they both knew it. "Alpha Kieran!" Marcus's voice carried through the door, tight with barely controlled anger. "We know you're in there. Present yourself immediately." Ember started toward the door, but Kieran caught her hand. "Let me handle this first. I need to gauge how much trouble we're really in." She nodded, stepping back as he opened the door to face 5 of his pack members. Marcus stood at the front, his weathered face dark, with a mixture of relief and fury. Behind him, she recognized the 2 men who'd searched her cottage before, plus 2 others she didn't know. 3 days, Marcus said without preamble. 3 days, without word, without contact, while your pack wondered if their alpha was dead in a ditch somewhere. I needed time to think. Think? One of the younger men, Jake, she remembered, laughed harshly. While pack business ground to a halt, while 3 different neighboring packs sent messengers asking about trade agreements you were supposed to review. The business can wait, can it? Marcus stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Because while you were out here playing house, the Riverside pack decided to test our boundaries. They moved a hunting party onto our territory yesterday. When our patrols confronted them, they claimed they thought the land was unclaimed since our alpha had apparently abandoned his post. Ember saw Kieran's hands clench into fists. Anyone hurt? Not yet, but they're still there, waiting to see what you'll do about it. I'll handle Riverside. Will you? Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Because right now, it looks like you're more interested in whatever's behind that door than in protecting the 150 people who depend on you. Watch your tone, Marcus. Or what? You'll challenge me? Your father's best friend who helped train you? Who stood beside you when you took the alpha role at 19? Marcus shook his head. I'm not your enemy, Kieran. But your behavior these past 3 days has been that of a selfish child, not a pack leader. From her hiding spot inside, Ember felt each word like a physical blow. She'd known this moment would come, the moment when Kieran would have to choose between his responsibilities and whatever was growing between them. She just hadn't expected it to hurt this much. You're right, Kieran said quietly. Marcus blinked, clearly surprised. I am? About my behavior being selfish, about the pack needing their alpha. Kieran's voice grew stronger. But you're wrong about one thing. What's that? This isn't about playing house or avoiding responsibility. This is about recognizing that maybe our definition of leadership needs to evolve. Meaning? Kieran turned toward the door, and Ember's heart hammered as she realized what he was about to do. Ember, he called. Would you join us, please? Kieran, no, Marcus warned. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking, maybe for the first time in years. The door opened, and Ember stepped onto the porch. She'd braided her hair back and put on her best dress, a simple blue thing that brought out her eyes. But she still felt small and plain next to the raw power radiating from the men in her clearing. Gentlemen, Kieran said, his arms sliding protectively around her waist, I'd like you to meet Ember. She saved my life 3 nights ago when I collapsed in her snow, half frozen and bleeding from injuries. I was too proud to ask for help treating. Murmurs rippled through the group, But Marcus's expression remained thunderous. She's a lone Omega, Kieran. Unmated, unprotected, living outside pack law. She's also the bravest person I've ever met, Kieran replied calmly. And if you can't treat her with the respect she deserves, you can leave her territory. Her territory? Jake laughed. This is no man's land. Neutral ground that doesn't belong to any pack. Actually, Ember said quietly, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded, it does belong to someone. All eyes turned to her, and she felt her cheeks burn under their scrutiny. It belongs to me. I own this land legally, bought and paid for with my inheritance. I have the papers to prove it. The silence that followed was deafening. You're saying, Marcus said slowly, that our alpha has been recuperating on privately owned land? Land that could be claimed as sovereign territory under the old laws? Ember nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure where this was leading. Which means, Jake added, understanding dawning in his voice, that technically she could petition for pack status herself as a landowner. But she's just one person, another man protested. So was the founder of every pack that ever existed, Marcus said quietly. His eyes moved between Kieran and Ember with something that looked almost like approval. Before he gathered others to him, Kieran's arm tightened around Ember's waist. What are you thinking, Marcus? I'm thinking, the older man said, that maybe your 3-day disappearance wasn't as irresponsible as I first thought. I'm thinking that maybe you found something that could benefit not just you, but all of us. I don't understand, Ember said. Marcus smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Tell me, Miss Ember, what do you know about pack law regarding sanctuary territories? Nothing, she admitted. Sanctuary territories are neutral zones where injured or displaced shifters can seek refuge without fear of pack politics. They're incredibly rare because they require both legal land ownership and the backing of at least 2 established packs. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. If Miss Ember were to declare her land a sanctuary territory, and if the Moonstrike pack were to formally support that declaration, it would give her legal standing as a pack leader, Kieran finished, understanding flooding his voice. Even with just 2 members. 2 members? Ember looked between them in confusion. You and your alpha, Jake said, grinning for the first time since arriving. If you're mated, you automatically qualify as a breeding pair, which satisfies the pack formation requirements. We're not mated, Ember said quickly, heat flooding her cheeks. Yet, Kieran said softly, looking down at her with something warm and hopeful in his golden eyes. The weight of his gaze, the implications of what they were discussing, the sheer impossibility of it all, it should have terrified her. Instead, Ember felt something settling into place in her chest, like a puzzle piece finding its proper position. What would it mean? She asked. Sanctuary territory? It would mean, Marcus said carefully, that any shifter in distress could come to you for help, regardless of pack affiliation. It would mean neutrality in interpack conflicts. And it would mean that you and Kieran could build something new, something that doesn't have to follow the old rules. The council would never approve, one of the other men protested. The council doesn't have a choice, Marcus replied. Sanctuary law predates modern pack politics by 2 centuries. If the paperwork is filed correctly and 2 packs support it, recognition is automatic. Kieran turned to face his pack members fully. And if I were to step down as alpha of Moonstrike and join Ember in establishing this sanctuary? The silence that followed was absolute. You can't be serious, Jake breathed. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Kieran's voice carried absolute conviction. Marcus, you've been doing the real work of leadership for years anyway. The pack trusts you, respects you. Maybe it's time that became official. You want me to be alpha? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I want you to be what you already are, the leader this pack actually needs. Ember watched the interplay between the men, seeing years of friendship and loyalty and unspoken understanding pass between them. These weren't just pack members, they were family, bound by something deeper than law or tradition. The council will fight this, Marcus warned. Let them, Kieran said. Change never comes easily, but sometimes it's necessary for survival. He looked around at each of the faces surrounding them. How many of you are truly happy with the way things are? How many wake up excited about your lives instead of just grinding through another day of duty and expectation? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ember watched as expressions shifted, some defensive, others thoughtful. I haven't felt like myself in years, Jake admitted quietly. I became a warrior because it was expected, but I've always wanted to be a healer. In our pack, that's seen as weakness for someone of my bloodline. Sarah's been hiding her mating bond with that human in town for 3 years because mixed matings are discouraged, another man added. She's miserable, but she's too afraid of being cast out to tell anyone. And how many others are living half-lives because our rules say they have to fit into neat little boxes? Kieran asked. How many are choosing duty over happiness because they think that's what strength looks like? Marcus was quiet for a long time, his weathered face thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. Your father would be proud of you, you know. Not because you're following in his footsteps, but because you're brave enough to forge your own path. Then you'll support the sanctuary petition? I'll do more than that. Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand to Kieran. I'll be honored to serve as Alpha of Moonstrike, and I'll be equally honored to have the Wildwood Sanctuary as our ally. Wildwood Sanctuary? Ember asked. Kieran smiled, the first truly joyful expression she'd seen from him. If you approve of the name, it seems fitting for a place where lost souls come to find themselves. As they shook hands, sealing an agreement that would reshape both their lives, Ember felt the last of her walls crumbling. She'd spent 3 years convincing herself that independence meant isolation, that strength meant never needing anyone else. But watching these powerful men redefine leadership and loyalty, seeing Kieran choose love over duty and somehow make both stronger in the process, she realized she'd had it backwards all along. True strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about choosing who you stood with. The pack council meeting that followed 3 weeks later was unlike anything in Moonstrike history. For the first time, an Omega sat at the great table as an equal, her land rights and sanctuary petition making her a sovereign leader in her own right. Elder Thorne studied the documents Ember had presented, his weathered face thoughtful. These papers are legitimate, he announced finally. Under the territorial accords of 1,847, Miss Ember has the legal right to establish a sanctuary territory on her claimed land. This is madness, Beta Sarah protested. We can't just let alphas walk away whenever they find a pretty face. I'm not walking away from responsibility, Kieran said calmly from his seat beside Ember. I'm walking toward a different kind of responsibility, one that serves a broader purpose. And what about us? Asked Jake, though his tone was more curious than accusatory. What happens to Moonstrike? Marcus rose from his chair, commanding attention with the natural authority that had made him an effective beta for years. Moonstrike will continue under my leadership, with the full support of our former alpha. We've already begun implementing some of the changes Kieran suggested: more flexibility in role assignments, support for non-traditional matings, and a focus on individual happiness alongside pack welfare. Changes that have been working, added another council member. Morale is higher than it's been in years. Elder Thorne leaned forward. And what of the alliance treaties? The trade agreements? Other packs will see this as instability. Actually, Ember said, speaking for the first time since presenting her petition, they'll see it as innovation. We've already received inquiries from 3 other packs interested in establishing formal relationships with a neutral sanctuary territory. She pulled out a folder of correspondence. The Riverside pack that was testing your boundaries? They've requested mediation services for a territorial dispute with the Eastern Valley Wolves. 2 other packs want our help facilitating trade negotiations. And we've had 4 individual shifters request sanctuary while they transition between packs or deal with personal crises. The council members exchanged surprised looks. "You've been busy," Thorne observed. "We've been useful," Kieran corrected. "There's a real need for neutral ground in our community. A place where disputes can be resolved without bloodshed, where displaced shifters can find temporary refuge, where new ideas can be tested without threatening existing power structures." "You make it sound almost practical," Sarah said, her earlier hostility fading into consideration. "Because it is practical," Ember stood, facing the assembled council with growing confidence. "Change doesn't have to mean destruction. Sometimes it means evolution." The debate continued for hours, but the tide had turned. When the final vote was called, the council approved the Wildwood Sanctuary by a margin of 15 to 7. As they walked out of the Great Hall together, Marcus caught Kieran's arm. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once the papers are filed, there's no going back." Kieran looked at Ember, then back at his oldest friend. "For the first time in my life, I'm sure about everything." 6 months later, Ember stood in her expanded garden, watching Kieran repair the roof of their new guest house. The sight of him shirtless, laughing at something their newest resident had said, filled her with a contentment she'd never imagined possible. The Wildwood Sanctuary had grown beyond anything they'd originally envisioned. What had started as a legal fiction to protect their relationship had evolved into something truly special, a community where shifters could find refuge, resolution, and renewal. Their first permanent resident had been Jake, who'd left Moonstrike to pursue healing arts under Ember's guidance. Then came Maria, a young Omega fleeing an abusive pack who'd found safety and purpose helping other trauma survivors. The elderly couple by the creek had arrived seeking a quiet place to retire from pack politics. And their newest addition was a teenage shifter struggling with identity issues that traditional pack structures couldn't accommodate. "Deep thoughts?" Kieran dropped down from the roof, landing gracefully beside her. "Happy thoughts," Ember corrected, sliding into his arms. "I was thinking about that night you collapsed on my porch." "My finest moment," he said dryly. "It was, actually. It was the moment you chose to trust someone instead of facing everything alone." A howl echoed from the direction of Moonstrike territory, a sound they heard occasionally when the wind was right. Under Marcus's leadership, the neighboring pack was thriving. The two communities had established a relationship built on mutual respect and cooperation, often sharing resources and celebrating holidays together. "Any regrets?" Ember asked. Kieran considered the question seriously, as he did everything. "Just one." Her heart skipped. "What?" "I regret that it took me so long to understand that real strength comes from vulnerability, from admitting you need someone else." He cupped her face in his hands, golden eyes warm with love and certainty. "I spent 27 years learning how to be an alpha, but you taught me how to be myself." As if summoned by their conversation, young Beth came running from the direction of the main road, her face bright with excitement. "Kieran, Ember, there's someone at the border asking for sanctuary." Ember and Kieran exchanged a look. This was the 7th refugee this month word was spreading through the supernatural community about the Wildwood Sanctuary's unusual approach to pack life. "Male or female?" Kieran asked. "Female. Young Omega. Looks like she's been traveling for days. She's scared but determined." "Well then," Ember said, already heading toward the border. "Let's go give someone else a chance to come home." As they walked through the forest together, Ember reflected on how much had changed since that winter night. She'd thought she was saving a dying wolf, but it turned out they'd saved each other. More than that, they'd created something new. A community built on choice instead of obligation, love instead of duty, growth instead of tradition. Behind them, the sounds of their sanctuary preparing for a new arrival drifted through the trees. Laughter, conversation, the warm noise of people who genuinely cared for each other. It was everything Ember had never known she wanted. And it had all started with one simple decision. To choose compassion over caution. Ready to change another life? Kieran asked as they approached the border. Ember smiled, remembering the wounded wolf who'd begged for help in a voice rough with pain and hope. Always. Together, they went to welcome another lost soul home. 1 year later, the Wildwood Sanctuary hosted its first interpack gathering. Representatives from 12 different communities came to see the experimental sanctuary that had started with a lone Omega and a runaway Alpha. The celebration lasted 3 days. Stories were shared, alliances formed, and new ideas about pack governance spread like wildfire through the supernatural community. Several other packs announced plans to restructure their own hierarchies, prioritizing individual happiness alongside collective responsibility. The gathering also served another purpose. It was Ember and Kieran's mating ceremony. Not the elaborate, politically motivated affair that traditional pack law would have demanded, but a simple celebration of two people choosing to build a life together. As Ember stood before their assembled friends and allies, wearing a dress she'd made herself from fabric that shifted between silver and blue, like moonlight on water, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. "A year ago," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd, "I thought strength meant standing alone. I thought safety meant never risking my heart. I thought the only way to protect myself was to need no one." She looked at Kieran, resplendent in simple black that made his golden eyes glow like flames. "Then a wounded wolf collapsed on my doorstep, and everything I thought I knew about strength and safety and love turned out to be wrong." Kieran stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "A year ago, I thought leadership meant sacrifice. I thought duty required giving up personal happiness. I thought the strongest thing I could do was face everything alone." He smiled, and Ember saw reflected in his eyes the same wonder she felt every morning when she woke up beside him. "Then a brave Omega chose kindness over caution, and taught me that the strongest thing anyone can do is trust someone else with their heart." Elder Thorne, who had agreed to officiate despite his initial skepticism about their unconventional union, stepped forward with the ceremonial binding cord. "Do you, Kieran Knightwood, choose this woman as your mate, your partner, and your equal, promising to stand with her through whatever challenges may come?" "I do," Kieran said, his voice steady and sure. "Do you, Ember Knightwood, choose this man as your mate, your partner, and your equal, promising to stand with him through whatever challenges may come?" "I do," Ember replied, her heart so full of joy it felt like it might burst. As Thorne bound their hands together with the silver cord that symbolized their union, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd. But Ember only had eyes for Kieran, for the man who taught her that love wasn't about losing yourself in someone else. It was about becoming more yourself than you'd ever been alone. The celebration continued long into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from watching two people find their perfect match. But the moment Ember treasured most came near dawn, when she and Kieran slipped away from the festivities to walk alone through their forest. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked, noting the contemplative expression on her face. "The future," she said. "Our children will grow up in a world where they can choose their own paths, where strength is measured by kindness instead of dominance, where love is valued more than duty." She leaned into his warmth, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "They'll never know what it feels like to believe they're not enough exactly as they are." Kieran stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with the same gentle reverence he'd shown that first night when she'd kissed him. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything. When we're old and gray and our children are having children of their own, promise you'll still remember that night when I was dying in the snow and chose to trust a stranger." Ember began to laugh, not the bitter sound of someone who'd given up hope, but something warm and full of joy and absolute certainty about the future they were building together. "Kieran, love," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him under the stars. "How could I ever forget the night my real life began?" And as they held each other in the pre-dawn quiet, surrounded by the home they'd built and the community they'd created, Ember knew that some stories don't end, they just keep growing, like seeds planted in winter soil, waiting for spring to show the world what's possible when someone chooses hope over fear. The wounded wolf had indeed come home. They both had. Their love story would be told for generations, not as a fairy tale of destiny fulfilled, but as something far more powerful. Proof that even the loneliest hearts can find their home when they're brave enough to let someone else in. And in the forest that had witnessed their first meeting, their first trust, their first love, the Wildwood Sanctuary continued to grow, a testament to the truth that Ember had learned that snowy night when she chose compassion over caution. Sometimes the best way to save yourself is to save someone else first.